Hello and welcome to this special edition of Energy Week. I'm David Cass. Well, August this year marks the 10th anniversary of Iraq's invasion of Kuwait. The war which followed devastated much of Kuwait's oil infrastructure. No one can forget the oil fires which raged across Kuwait's oil fields, blocking out the sun for weeks at a stretch. The country took 9 months to put out the fires, but it's only now that it's recovering from the crippling effects of the Iraqi occupation and its withdrawal. Sunita Kaul visited Kuwait recently to study the continuing impact of the 1990 invasion on Kuwait's oil industry.
It's part of history now. Retreating Iraqi forces setting more than 700 Kuwaiti oil wells on fire, creating huge oil lakes. The war incapacitated most of Kuwait's refining capacity and razed to ground many oil collecting centers. The oil fires were extinguished within 9 months, but despite persistent efforts, oil lakes like this one continue to exist. This is just one example of the extensive damage done to Kuwait's oil industry during the Iraq invasion. Besides lots of other property, 10 such oil gathering centers were completely destroyed. The process of rebuilding is still on, but precious resources which should have gone into expansion of the oil industry are now being sapped in its rehabilitation. A major legacy of the oil war has been the economic burden of rebuilding the country's oil infrastructure. Much of this burden has fallen on the oil companies. Like the last traces of the Iraqi occupation, which linger on, like the stank here, the state oil companies are likely to continue carrying this burden for some time to come.
From the oil sector and the government, we've had to pay for all the damage. That's had to come from our funding, and the government has to fund the damage which caused to the other sectors. In the oil sector, the main areas of damage is our surface facilities, our refineries, and then you saw the horrific oil fires which went on for 9 months. And then you had, as a result of all these combined, the environmental damage. So all the oil lakes were created. So for the last, almost 10 years, we've had to repair gradually this basis. Even today, we are not at the position we were before the invasion. Our surface facilities, the gathering centers do not have the same capacity we had before the invasion. Our export facilities, the ability to export the amount of oil is not what it was before the invasion. And the environment still has not been cleaned up. So it's been a major effort on our behalf, and it was very, very expensive.
How much money has gone into repairing that damage, and does it still continue?
I can talk about only the oil sector, but we're talking about in the tens of billions of dollars.
How long do you think you'll take before it comes back to the original capacity?
Probably another 4 to 5 years at the minimum.
So has that set you back, and how do you feel about it?
Well, definitely set us back, because it has taken away our resources. What could have gone for growth and to other ventures, actually it's gone back to rebuilding to where we were. So there's been a tremendous opportunity cost of, we could have gone for doing other things, but the focus has been just rebuilding what we had before the invasion.
Do you still continue to pay for that damage, or that's over now, that chapter is closed?
There are still investments that we are undertaking even now, which is repairing the damages. We have projects for gathering centers which were damaged from 1990, and they still have not finalized, not finished. So there's still, over the next few years, still some construction of previously damaged investments.
Kuwait Petroleum Corporation, the umbrella organization that manages the country's diverse oil interests, is currently carrying out a restructure study. In order to meet the growing challenges of the marketplace, the corporation, which manages both upstream and downstream services, is likely to shed some of its non-profitable business. But there's skepticism within the country about whether KPC, despite its own firm resolve, will be allowed to carry out the planned overhaul.
The 1998 low oil prices proved a turning point in many an OPEC economy. Kuwait is no exception. In fact, with a zero economic growth in 1998, the compulsions for it to relook its energy sector are far stronger. The state of Kuwait realized that it had to restructure its oil sector and make it cost efficient.
We are a state-owned company with a lot of the bureaucracy of a state-owned company and the restrictions of authority of a state-owned company. And we're competing in a world where our competitors are becoming much larger. The mergers of the Exxon Mobils, the BP, Amoco, Arcos, these are becoming much bigger animals. But as they become bigger, they're also becoming more nimble. Then you have the e-commerce world, the internet world, and we're finding that our processes and the speed of our decision making, what it should be, is a lot of lacking. So we're trying to see how can we improve that by the processes, the procedures, the internal communications, and part of it has to do with restructuring the organization.
After reviewing long-term strategies for the oil sector, the corporation decided to make a clean break from its non-core areas like marine and chemicals. Detailed studies, which will be completed in 6 months' time, will help the management evaluate what it can sell to the private sector.
And we believe that our structure, which was created about 1980, is no longer the right structure with which to fight our competitors and to face the challenges we have in the future. So the outcome of the studies will be what will be the core assets and core activities, and then how do we organize for that in the light of the developments in the world.
What is the kind of competition that you face from multinational companies?
We're producing just below 2 million barrels a day today. Of the 2 million barrels per day, only 130,000 barrels per day is consumed in Kuwait. So most of our production, whether it's crude, petrochemicals, products, is all sold internationally. So when we go and we have to sell in a tender in India, we have to sell in competition with the oil companies. When we look at our downstream assets outside Kuwait, under the Kuwait brand, we're competing against the Shells, the BPs. So most of our operation, I'd say 98% of our operation, we have to face the competition.
But reorganization of KPC can be done only within the constitutional framework, and the constitution does not allow foreign ownership in Kuwait's oil sector. Privatization too is out of the question. Instead, the Kuwaiti government is looking at foreign investment in upstream oil development on the basis of per barrel fees to foreign firms. But reportedly, the country's parliament is opposed to the move.
It seems that the government enjoys throwing the ball on the parliament side, receiving it again, and hitting it again, and it goes on like this. Privatization has been in the parliament for a long time now. They are still discussing it. The foreign investor law, we call it. Today they've discussed it, and they are still discussing it. So I think the problem is, the more such issues drags, the more chances the government are losing. I think the existing Minister of Oil is serious as a person, as a minister. But I don't think the government and the parliament are serious enough to take such actions. And I think this guy, the minister, I expect him to get frustrated soon and then slow down and forget about it.
We found that there are different views about the subject, whether it's in the parliament or in the public. And we're going through a process now that we have a draft law which is approved by a cabinet. It's what we call a draft enabling law. This has already gone to parliament. It may get discussed very shortly. And that will be a very important forum for discussion on what we think is a very important subject. You know, Kuwait is a firm believer on the political democracy, and our parliament plays a very, very important role here. So for us, it's very important as an oil sector to get the full support of the people through the parliament of any initiative we have. We believe this initiative is in the interest of Kuwait. And we believe once we've given the chance to discuss this openly with our colleagues in parliament and the laws presented, we believe that people will come to see the benefits of the state of Kuwait of a project like this.
The hiccup seems to be the resistance that the government is facing from the Islamists, who have deep links with fundamentalist groups like Muslim Brotherhood and Salaf. Political analysts say that the Kuwaiti Islamists are opposed to the country opening up and that the government is itself responsible for the extreme power that the Islamists yield today. In the late 70s, the government gave unbridled power to them, including a license to operate an Islamic bank outside the Kuwait Central Bank purview. They can also collect charity money openly. The unaudited money is reportedly funding fundamentalist activities in countries like Egypt, Afghanistan, India. Today, the government has no option but to appease them. So, whether KPC is able to recreate itself into an organization of the 21st century depends on who wins the tussle in Parliament.
Well, since the Gulf War, the Kuwaiti government's dependence on oil revenues has increased to as much as 95%. This year, because of a determined move to collect more taxes and do away with subsidies in sectors like health, this dependence is likely to fall to about 90%. But political and economic analysts in Kuwait told us that Kuwait's economy is seriously ailing. Sunita Kaul talked with Jassim Budai, the editor-in-chief of Kuwait's largest circulation Arabic daily newspaper, Al Ray Al Am, about the health of Kuwait's economy.
As a result of the invasion, Kuwait had to spend, the government I mean, a good portion of our foreign investments during the invasion period and for the building of the country, which drained almost most of our foreign investments. Before the invasion of Kuwait in August 1990, the oil revenues came to around 50% of the country's income, while the foreign investments represented the other half. It's not the case now, and as a result of spending most of the reserves. The government now depends to a very good extent on the oil revenues, and that's affecting the government policies and future plans.
So what's been the major impact of all this?
The government, unfortunately, and since the early 60s, after the independence of Kuwait, allowed or encouraged every Kuwaiti to join the government, to work in the public sector. A policy which the government thought is right at that time, very wrong today. As a result of that, almost 95% of the Kuwaiti population, the working sector, works in the government today. And that's the biggest bill the government has to pay. Most of the oil income today, the drop in prices of oil, most of the income goes every year, every month, to pay wages, the public sector wages, which made the government in a very difficult position by having no extra funds to spend on other sectors.
What does the government need to do now?
After the invasion, the security worry became a major worry with the government. So they worry a lot about security. They closed the country. It's very difficult to get a visa. It's very difficult for a foreigner to come and work here. Kuwait was a pioneer in the early 60s and the 70s in the Gulf. The transit business, the free zones style business started in Kuwait in the Gulf. It's no more the case. One of the problems, the government inability to tackle problems, financial problems, mainly the stock exchange crisis, more than one crisis which we had, and the banking debts problems, the inability of the government to tackle those problems efficiently and at the right time. All this together were like diseases which affected the economy as a body. Today it's in intensive care. Unfortunately, till this moment, the government is responsible for curing this body, and today, economy represents almost everything in a country. The government till this moment believes or thinks that they can rescue that body with Panadols and things like that. What we need, what they should really consider, is a major surgery.
But what is it that needs to be done? In this program, we will look at the power sector in the Middle East, what the power requirements of the region are, and the progress made towards privatization. Rapid growth in population and rising pace of industrialization is pushing demand for electricity in the region 2 to 3 times the international average. And in some cases, like the UAE, it is reportedly rising at 10% a year. Let's look at a bit of statistics first. 2006, the Middle East requires an additional capacity of 92,275 kilowatts, nearly half the existing installed capacity of 150,000 megawatts. And the estimated cost is nearly $94 billion. There are some estimates which put the Middle East funds requirement at approximately $300 billion until the year 2010. The Gulf alone is facing an estimated $60 billion investment bill in its utility sector over the next 10 years to meet surging demand. Of particular interest is Saudi Arabia, where the scale of the investment required in the power sector dwarfs that of the other Gulf states. Installed capacity in Saudi Arabia is 21,558 megawatts. Additional capacity needed at a demand growth of 5.5% by 2006 is 13,400 megawatts. Projected cost is $20,000 million. Qatar installed generating capacity is 1,933 megawatts, and at a demand growth of 11%, 1,500 megawatts additional capacity is needed by 2006. Projected cost is $1,600 million. UAE installed capacity is 7,600 megawatts, and at a 10% demand growth, an additional capacity of 5,500 megawatts is needed by year 2006. These growth rates are putting pressure on governments to expand existing power infrastructure at breakneck speed. What are the issues involved for governments and private power developers in the Middle East market? How different is this market from others? Considering that there are abundant supplies of gas which could be utilized by power companies, how will it work out for the governments with subsidies still persisting? What about existing power transmission and distribution networks? To discuss all this, we have in the studio Mr. Ulf Stombach from ABB and Mr. Angus Hindley of Mead. Mr. Stombach, I'll begin with you. There are tremendous opportunities in the Middle East for development of power, considering the need and the growing demand. ABB seems to be moving out of power generation.
Well, that is not quite the situation. What ABB has done is that ABB has decided to stay on, but a little bit on the side. We've merged our activities in power generation together with Alstom of France, and by doing that we have created the world's largest power generation company. We are not actively involved in the management of this operation, but we are an investor, an owner, and there are several links between the two operations. We supply equipment, knowledge, etc. When it comes to development, we are still very much active, as our power generation development company, ABB Energy Ventures, is still active in the region.
But what was the reason? Was it something to do with heavy investments required in power generation? Was it something to do with that, or was it...
What ABB has decided to do is to free up capital tied up in assets. Power generation manufacturing is very capital intensive, and to refocus on knowledge-based services, which is the future of ABB.
Angus, could you throw some light on it? Do you think that power generation companies will face tough times because of the intense capital requirement and the gestation periods, long gestation periods that are required?
Well, if you look on the equipment supply side, I mean, there's been intense activity in the sector over the last 10 years, and there's been mergers continually in the market, and now you're basically down to 5 or 6 main players. In the Middle East in particular, it's actually less than that at the moment. There's virtually only 3 in the market. That's one issue. I think the other issue, say, for turbine suppliers in this region is that the rest of the world has really been exploding in terms of power generation. You look at the US market, you look at the European market, and this is having an impact on this part of the world because for very large turbines, there is not a huge availability from the suppliers, and therefore people are saying, well, if you want a certain type of turbine, you're going to have to wait at least 2 years.
Now, if you look at the Middle East, there's a tremendous scope for power development, but there are a lot of restrictions too. I mean, in terms of laws, in terms of subsidies. Could you tell us about what the major restrictions are?
Yes, I mean, I think for a start with the Middle East, you can't look at it as being one unit as far as privatization is concerned. Here in the Gulf, you have virtually all countries now saying that we are going to go ahead with privatization, but there's really, at present, only 2 which are seriously doing it, and that is Abu Dhabi and Oman. Now, as a developer, people say what we need for a government to be serious about privatization is we need transparency in the bidding process, we need a clear government commitment to the process, and we also need rules and regulations in place which can guarantee our investments in the market.
Mr. Stormberg, do you think that that is not here? I mean, of course, a lot has been talked about hurdles as far as transparency goes, but do you think that's a major obstacle, and how far do you think that's going to be removed or is in the process of being removed?
Well, I think in places who have opted seriously to go for privatization, it can be done. As ABB, I'm extremely impressed with what the government in Abu Dhabi achieved with its privatization, which was basically initiated, correct me if I'm wrong, Angus, some 3 years ago, and which within less than 18 months resulted in the first IPP being in place.
But the fact remains that transmission and distribution has been kept with the government and the subsidies do remain.
Well, that's really an issue that you would have to ask the people in Abu Dhabi, but my understanding is
if non-OPEC production increases at a high rate because of the high prices, if Iraq comes back in a big way and starts developing some huge new fields that they have already found, then we could have a glut again.
Do you think Iraq will seriously pump in so much oil into the oil market?
Well, Iraq wants to. Its economy is shattered. They have, as many people have observed, gone back to the Middle Ages in terms of welfare for their citizens. So Iraq has to spend vast amounts of money to bring it back up to speed, to bring the economy back to a good state.
Hello and welcome to the Energy Week. I'm Sunita Kaul. In Riyadh, the 3-day 7th International Energy Forum ended last week with a new proposal which many say could sow the seeds of a shift in balance from OPEC to Riyadh. The Crown Prince Abdullah bin Abdulaziz bin Saud mooted the idea of a permanent secretariat for the forum in Riyadh. Well, in this, our first report on the 3-day forum, we look at what the forum has achieved so far and the proposal to set up a new secretariat. The forum, a non-formal gathering of representatives from energy-producing and non-producing countries, held its first forum in Paris in 1991 and the last was in Cape Town in 1998.
And although we do not necessarily agree on all points of view, some of the views were summarized today that we have agreement, full agreement on 6 views, and we have differences on 3 views, maybe on 2.5 views. On the issue of supply, OPEC, or the producing countries, believe that there is sufficient supply in the market today. Some consuming countries believe that there may not be because inventories are low. And so we have these differences, and they are there and they are healthy.
Well, the major achievement, of course, is breaking the deadlock or breaking the perceived conflicting interests and policies between producers and consumers. What we discover actually for a long time, but we discover it more after the Iraqi invasion of Kuwait, that there is a more common interest than something which divide us. And that's where the beginning of the forum started.
It is important to keep a dialogue going, a dialogue between producer and consuming countries. The dialogue that we've established over the last year has helped all sides better understand the market and our positions in it. I agree with the suggestions that we need to meet often. We don't have views on the specifics of this producer-consumer organization. We will study them.
The forum may soon lose its informality if a permanent secretariat is set up in Riyadh.
What we are saying is, let's stop blaming each other and let's talk about methods of stabilizing the
To
oil.
watch the consuming countries feel about high oil prices, about taxation, about the current turmoil in the oil market, let us see this interview with the Deputy Prime Minister of Netherlands. I asked her why European countries, including hers, had such high taxation.
Well, let me be quite clear about that. Our taxation on fuel has on itself nothing to do with the fuel. It has to do with influencing car drivers to drive more efficiently. And what we've seen is that due to our fuel tax, our cars have become more efficient because it's attractive to buy a car which uses as little as possible. And what we see is that sometimes car drivers don't drive as much as they maybe would like to because the price influences their choices. So maybe they take their bicycle or the public transport at one time. And we do not do it to bring down the use of fuel, but to not make it grow as tremendously as it would grow if we wouldn't do nothing. And what we've seen in our economy is that with 1% economic growth, our mobility is growing with 1.5%. Our infrastructure is not ready for that, so we have terrible traffic jams around the city, and that can influence our economy in a negative way. So that's the only reason, and what we've done until now, what we've seen until now, is that due to our terribly high taxation, the growth had not been 100% in 10 or 15 years as we expected, but maybe 70%. But still, it's a huge growth, so there's no way that we can cut down the fuel use, really. It's only a way to influence the use of cars. I presume, I must say, that in a few years, we will not necessarily have to tax the fuel anymore, but we can replace it by some technical thing, like a computer, where your kilometers are registered, and then you can tell whether a person drives in rush hour or in a suburb or in an urban hour, on an urban road, so that then you can tax even better and more specific at the places where your problems are.
Is the EU changing its fuel tax structure?
We are talking about energy taxes for a long time already, and what I hope, of course, that one day we will have one system for that. And from my point of view, the best basis for that would be the carbon one. And that also would bring oil in a better position than coal, for instance. But it's a tough discussion in the European Union because, of course, we also have countries who still produce coal. But from my point of view, that would be the most honest way to do it, because then you influence CO2 emissions directly, which we certainly have to do with our Kyoto obligations.
The EU did not want to dip into its strategic petroleum reserve. What was the reason?
I have been thinking about it. I must say, when I heard the first discussion from the United States, I thought we have to think it over too. What we found out is that when the United States did so, well, it brought down the prices, but maybe for 2 days. It's not a real solution. It's only you do something because you have a terrible problem, and maybe even an internal political problem. And what I would, after thinking well about it, think is a very dangerous thing, is that then, at that moment, you become a player on the market, and you are responsible for the price of, you make yourself responsible for the oil prices. Whilst my idea is that more and more the market ought to do its work better. So then, of course, you have to play a strategic role. You have to keep your inventories in order to be ready when there is really a problem on the market, but not so much caused by prices, but caused by a lack of production. And I think that there we have to play a role, but not on being a market player ourselves.
So who are the real players in the oil market? Is it true that it is actually the speculators now? I mean, what the impression that I get is it's going out of OPEC hands, it's going out of government hands.
I don't know. What I see is that there are also market failures. We see that the capacity of refinement is not good enough. Let's say there's not enough reserve capacity. What we know is that we really lack data. There is not enough information exchange. I think that OPEC and IEA must play a role, but maybe we also have to rethink how we can make the market more transparent by exchanging data, more than we do until now. So it's not only speculators, but they can play a role as long as we keep the market transparent. If there's more transparency, it gets also more difficult for speculation.
But till now, it's the API and the IEA figures which have made the market react, and not the OPEC figures.
That's true. We think that also the IEA figures are not good enough. So what I think we'll have to look for a more integrated system with as much as transparency as possible. And
Britain has lately been in turmoil over its high fuel taxation policy. Britain is also an oil-producing country, and high fuel prices are not entirely to its disadvantage. I met up with the Energy Minister of Britain and asked her whether high oil prices had hurt her country.
We are certainly hurt by high oil prices, and we're a producing country as well, because our industry and our consumers are facing high oil prices, which has an impact on the competitiveness of the country. And of course, as a developed economy, we can perhaps withhold the shocks much better than a developing country. My real anxiety in the long term is the impact on the developing economies of oil prices that are unsustainable.
Do you think that exploration in the North Sea has increased due to high oil prices?
There has been an increase in exploration activity in the North Sea as a result of higher oil prices. We suffered from the drop of oil prices to less than $10 a barrel. Our industry became